Last week, the State Department announced their plans to pull the United States out of the Open Skies Treaty. This is the third little yet significant arms control agreement that the Trump administration has pulled out of. Is there any logic behind this? Or is this just another part of Trump's isolationist worldview? All this will be discussed today on the Tonic Accord podcast. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. I'm Alex, joined by my friend and co-host, Drew. Drew, what's up?
Hey, Alex. I'm ready to talk about some missile-related stuff.
Yeah, man, this is one of the issues that's going on right now that I think has been obviously overshadowed by just all the other chaotic events going on around the world. But as of, I think it was May 21st, the Trump administration, and more specifically the State Department, announced that they are going to be pulling out of the Open Skies Treaty.
Right.
And this basically allows all the, I think it's 35 countries that are involved in this, to basically be able to fly over each other's airspace and over bases. And so by pulling out of this, the United States has said that Russia has violated this, and I'm sure there's no doubt that Russia has violated this, but a lot of people are criticizing what's next. So we're pulling out of this, and this is one of the important arms controls treaties following the Cold War. And since Trump has come into office, we've pulled out of the Iran deal, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and then there's also fears that we may pull out of the New START deal with Russia, which is a weapons deal in 2020 as well. So what are your thoughts on this? Should we be pulling out of these?
Well, first off, you're right. Well, you mentioned a little bit, what is the Open Skies Treaty, right? It's this idea that, it was an agreement that we would allow these surveillance flights over each other's territories so that we can keep track of missile bases and movement of military, right? It was the idea that if the Western European, more NATO aligned states could observe military and base movements in Russia and vice versa, if we all knew what was happening, it would be less likely then to lead to escalated conflict, right? It was this kind of idea that if everything's out on the table, then we can have better decision making and avoid destruction. That's the idea behind the treaty, right? And I think that the reasoning behind us leaving, there's a good logical argument. The reasoning is, Mike Pompeo and Trump believe that Russia has not been upholding their end of the agreement and has been, in their words, cheating this agreement. And so they want to back out. I understand the logic behind this decision, but I don't agree with the end result, right? I understand that if you think Russia is cheating these treaties, something needs to be done, of course, but just leaving and backing out, and also, by the way, getting rid of our ability to then observe Russia's military movements as well as, missile-based construction and everything, then we just have less intelligence on Russia. So I don't think it's the correct response, but I do understand the logic behind the argument.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because it's true that it's not perfect, but I think the problem in international affairs in general is that they're somewhat like unicorns. Like, looking for a good deal and a perfect deal in international affairs is like looking for a unicorn. You're never going to find it, and I think you need to take some of these with what you can. And the problem with this administration I have, especially when it comes to our foreign agreements, our treaties, and our arms deals, is that Trump always says he wants a better deal, but I don't know about you, man, but when you pull out of something, it's kind of hard to get a better deal when there's no framework in place.
Yes.
And like, that's my big problem with not just this one, but all the other ones, is just the fact that we're again starting now from ground zero. We're starting from the beginning again. And
right.
And you're right. Like, Russia, I have no doubt. I totally believe that Russia has been playing against the rules. I mean, Putin, as we've seen, gallivants across Europe playing by his own rules. But in my opinion, and like you had said, this is not just for everyone playing by the rules and for data sharing. It's for transparency. And as we saw during the Cold War, if you're kept in the dark and you see another country escalating, do you react? Do you arm up and get ready for war? I think it's better to know what the other guys are doing, even if it's not perfect. And I think that's why we've seen a lot of the international community, along with military generals and ex-Pentagon officials, completely reject what the administration's doing. And Trump said that, oh, we have a great deal with Russia and we're going to have a better deal. And I just don't completely buy that. And I think it's dangerous. And it just illustrates the idea that sometimes you have to settle with what you have. There's a great song by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young called Love the One You're With. And I think that's kind of what we have to do here is if we can't be with the deal we want, we have to love the one we're with.
And also you could work to amend it, right? I mean, I don't think just backing out, right, taking your handball away from the court is the only option. There's 35 states as a part of this agreement. And I mean, that's 35 people we can try and work with. I mean, maybe save Russia, but all the other people, right, like Britain, the Western European states that are also involved in this Open Skies Treaty, we need to be working with them to be like, okay, we all understand that Russia is cheating. And by the way, real quick, to give an example of what that means is, the idea behind this treaty is to countries allow these unarmed surveillance flights. Well, Russia, I guess, denied U.S. access to a corridor over some of these Eastern European states. I think I'm trying to find where it is. But essentially, Russia was not letting us do some of these flights over areas around Crimea, Azerbaijan, South Ossetia. And so, there's real concerns. But it's like, I think we have to work with our allies in this to maybe amend, maybe have more accountability on Russia, but to just take the ball away from the court. I don't think that actually produces a good end result. Now, like you said, Mike Pompeo has said that there's a good chance we'll come back to this treaty in 6 months. But I have not seen the Trump administration really prove themselves as far as constructing new international agreements. I haven't seen that happen. I've seen them be very good at leaving and deconstructing established agreements, i.e. the Iran deal or the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which we'll talk about in a bit, I'm sure. But I haven't seen, I don't believe Pompeo or Trump when they say we'll come back in 6 months and build something better, because I haven't seen them do that with anything else yet.
Right, exactly. That's where my big fear is. If you're going to put out a statement like that, where's the proof? How are you going to prove to the American people and to the world that you're capable of doing this? And I mean, look at the Iran deal. Trump was going to pull us out and give us a much better deal. Clearly, I don't know about you, man, but what I'm seeing over the world right now is that Iran and us are not working towards a better deal right now. Maybe it's clandestine or something, but what I've seen, no. And I completely agree with you that, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the point is not just that arms control. It's the fact that we had two Cold War powers that hated each other and hated each other's ideology and need to find a way to work towards transparency. And that's what this has done. And there are other members. And you're right, amending it, working towards a better solution is a great option. And I think an interesting point about this was I was looking at an article in The Diplomat, which was talking about why the U.S. potentially pulled out of this. And they had an interesting point, is that the U.S. may be blaming Russia for violating this, but Russia's been doing this for years. This is nothing new. And what the Diplomat thinks the main reason is, and I think there's probably some reason to it, is that the U.S. is very concerned about China right now. And China's not in any agreement like this. And China's pretty much doing what they want with no transparency. And I think the U.S. is a little bit worried that if they're held accountable while China's not being held accountable, China might get ahead. And so the U.S. has actually been talking with Russia and mentioning things like this, is that why don't we bring China and Russia back to the table? And China's in an interesting place, right? As we talk about many weeks, they're always on kind of the offensive right now. They're a growing power that needs to kind of get their sea legs out before they really start doing things. And part of that is they're boosting up their nuclear arsenals, they're boosting up their defense, their surveillance, their data. And all of that kind of goes against what these arms control treaties are doing. So in my opinion, and I think that the U.S. is basically saying that if China's not part of this, why should we be part of this?
Yeah, that also plays into us backing out of the INF Treaty, right? This is a treaty that banned the land-based ballistic missiles and cruise missiles with a range of 310 to 620 miles. So intermediate range ballistic missiles, also called IBMs. So we signed this. Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev signed the INF Treaty, back in the 80s. But to the point about China is the reason we backed out. The reason the Trump administration backed out a few years ago is because China is not a part of that treaty. China is, has plenty of air to sea ballistic missiles in the South China Sea area. So the logic there was we were limiting ourselves with an INF treaty with Russia when China was, like you said, not a part of any of these agreements, kind of doing their own thing. So the United States figured, well, we need to get back in action and get our arsenal back up. I think that is, again, I do understand the logic behind these arguments. I know there is an argument there to be made, but I think that what we should do is, the more constructivist approach, which is bring pressure China into these agreements using our allies, right? Making sure that we're all on the same page with our allies to try and pressure China into these agreements instead of backing out and then escalating with more armament. I think that we're taking steps back, right? We need to learn the lessons from the Cold War that, this escalation of armaments is not going to lead anywhere good. What we need to do is try to disarm and de-escalate with these global powers. And I think the main way we do that is making sure that we are in the same page as our allies instead of just abandoning treaties that our allies think are good. I mean, we're not alone in understanding that Russia is cheating the system, right? The other members of the Open Skies Treaty admit that, but they've said that it's not enough to just leave, right? Let's see here. Germany, France, Poland, and Britain has repeatedly explained to Washington that the difficulties on the Russian side in recent years, quote unquote, did not justify pulling out. So it's a very apparent that we're not on the same page with our NATO allies and our Western European allies, and that's what worries me.
Yeah, that worries me too. And this is something we've talked about a few times, I believe, on this, is that I think it's better to have an open dialogue and an open phone line with your enemies than to completely close it off. And again, like, the U.S. is kind of abandoning Europe. And I truly believe that the future of this kind of surveillance, cyber war, and these aggressions by Russia are going to be occurring in Europe and Eurasia.
Absolutely.
That's where China's tech battle, I guess you could say, the tech Cold War we're having with China, that's pretty much where that is at the forefront. And clearly Russia knows, especially in Eastern Europe, that there's really not much strength, and they can do what they want to meddle in those elections, just like they meddled in ours, And this is a time when I think we need to have some form of uniformity, and we just don't. And yeah, you were talking about how you don't want us to go back to the Cold War era politics, and we should learn from that. Yeah, it does not seem like that's the case. I was reading an interesting thing from some military officials in the Foreign Policy Research Institute, which was called The Death of Arms Control and the Birth of Putinism 3.0. Happy name, I know. And clearly, like, this is not just the Trump administration issue. Like, they talk about the U.S. has withdrawn in the last 20 years from the ABM Treaty, which is the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which was in 2002. And then in 2007, the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, which is, Russia had suspended that one. And then we had the one you talked about in 2018-19. And now we are also worried about START and Open Skies. And basically this institute's point is that the Cold War arms regime is pretty much over. That and they argue that even though we're so concerned about China, Russia is still the only country out there that we know is equal to us in total destruction. They're the only one that has equitable nukes to the amount we have, and has actually been known to have the hardest power when it comes to direct warfare. And so by closing the door on something like this, we're closing a channel. And they outlawed the 3 reasons why these treaties help Russia and the U.S. to cooperate. And the first one was, obviously, they provide information on one another, like you said. And the second one, which I thought was interesting, is it says it's to sanction cheating, because even though maybe Russia's cheating, we know they're cheating and we can react to it instead of just letting them do what they want. And the third one they said is to lengthen the shadow of the future. And I think that's an interesting one, is because, again, we're not playing perfect, but at least there's something down the line. And that kind of goes back to, I think, both of our criticism of what Trump's doing, is there's really nothing next. The future is an open road with no ideas to it.
Right. And I just think it's really abrupt, and I think it's a little preemptive right now. Again, like if we find that Russia's doing, you know, serious, what is it? You know, serious things that go against these treaties and major armament movements and major things. And our allies are like, whoa, this is getting crazy. We all in agreement. Then yeah, I mean, if it is a bunk deal, then you know we get out of it. I understand, like the logic is there. We don't want to be in a deal that only gives Russia an advantage and gives us a disadvantage. I'm with that, but I think that this deal, you know, did give us an advantage, right? Everything you just said, you know, even if they are cheating, we have the ability to see it, right? We have the ability to observe it because of the Open Skies Treaty, and we can have better monitoring of their movements and their actions. You know, I just think that like the Trump administration is just a little too gung ho with backing out of deals without really thinking of the long-term implications. And this is just another example of that. I don't know. I'm worried that Putin will then just take advantage of this and be like, wow, the U.S. isn't surveilling, you know, there's no surveillance on me by the U.S. anymore in regards to unmanned. And now I'm sure that we're still going to have some intelligence and surveillance, right? This doesn't mean we're just going to be, you know, Russia's going to be going blind and we're just going to let them do whatever. I don't think that at all. But I do think that this is a blow to perhaps our intelligence. Now, on the other hand, too, it's probably a blow to Russian intelligence because that means that they're no longer able to do their open skies surveillance on us. So that is a factor. But I just think that it's preemptive to do this without like talking with our allies and having a kind of a unified understanding of what's next.
Yeah, completely. And you know, I think the reason why, I mean, you know, Trump may be hard to follow in a lot of his day-to-day actions, but most of his foreign policy kind of comes back to, you know, two words: America first.
Right.
And you know, since the 80s, I remember when he first came onto the spotlight, he was criticizing China and globalization. You know, that's probably one of the only true policies that he's stuck with over the last 3 or 4 decades. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense to me why he believes this, because he's treating international affairs like a business, right? If you're getting screwed over, you pull the contract,
yeah.
or you fire the employee or whatever else. But in this, I think he too often plays the victim card. You know, like the U.S. is being taken advantage of. Oh, Russia's taking advantage of us. Iran is getting a better side of the deal, and it's problematic because the U.S. is not the victim. We helped create a world order that, for the most part, has kept a pretty stable world for the last several decades. And I don't really know if Trump knows that he's doing this or not, but he is slowly chipping away at it. He's chipping away at the legs, and eventually it's going to get top heavy and tumble over, you know. And clearly, as we've talked about, China's, again, I think this is just another check off China's how to get in front of the U.S. list, you know. Now they could just say, well, why don't we maybe see if we can get involved in this if they wanted to, which, I mean, that's a whole other discussion. But again, we're creating a void that someone else can fill. And like you said, I mean, Putin's probably going to take advantage of this, and no doubt China is.
Yeah, I mean, now let me also extend an olive branch to the Trump administration that, you know, we don't, right, this idea that in 6 months we'll come back to a better deal. Again, I'm skeptical of that happening. But let's say it does happen, and, you know, perhaps maybe we have more leverage now because, you know, we I don't know, we can say, you know, we'll start working on more IBMs if you don't play a ball. I mean, I can understand that if this is a way to get leverage, but again, back to my main point that I think we get a lot more leverage if we are in step with our allies on this. To those listening, though, I also think that it's important that this is not a Republican Democrat issue, right? A lot of these negotiations and treaties, especially the intermediate range nuclear forces treaty. I mean, this was signed by Ronald Reagan, right? Ronald Reagan was in his first term quite what some consider war hawkish, and then in his second term became a lot more, you know, constructivist towards peace, right? Signing deals with Gorbachev. Potentially, maybe that's what Trump's trying to do. I don't know. Maybe he's trying to be more tough now so that he can be more constructivist in the future, but I just don't see enough evidence to lead that to, you know, like I hope that's what it is. I hope someone can convince me that this is Trump trying to gain leverage on Russia and China to then create a better deal. But like we've said, I haven't seen that with Iran, and I haven't seen that with, I mean, sort of China, but the trade war is a little bit different than ballistic missiles. I don't know. I just, again, like, I can see how this might lead to something better, but I just don't have personally, I just don't have the faith in the Trump administration to have the wherewithal and the know-how to do something like this that, like, Reagan was able to do in the 80s.
Right. And I think the thing is trade wars can be a game of chicken, right? I don't know if international treaties can work that well generally. Like,
Yeah.
they're more of a pragmatic long-term approach, and yeah, to go on what you said earlier too, it is interesting because, yeah, when I was looking at this Open Skies Treaty, I think it was Eisenhower who first, like, mentioned this idea of this kind of transparent open skies type of program.
Mm-hmm.
And it was finally signed in 91 and 92 by the Bush administration at the end of their term. And so, this is like you said, this is no left or right issue. But the problem is I'm not as optimistic as you. I mean, I don't think you're optimistic either, but I'm not going to give the administration much of a benefit of the doubt on this, because just from what I've seen from Iran, the Paris Climate Accords, is like always the argument from, I guess, my side of the aisle is, well, we're going to get a better deal, or we need to do something to comply better. But, like, I mean, the Paris Agreement, I mean, most climate scientists and most politicians tell you that if you want to do something like that, you need everyone following the same standards. How do you do that if you just pulled out of the only mechanism we have?
Right.
And I think that's the same thing we're seeing with a lot of these. Like, okay, cool, there's going to be a new Iran deal, but how are we going to do that now when Iran is pissed at us and now getting help from China illegally from companies like Huawei? And like, then there's the START program, which is coming up, and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. And I mean, there's a retired U.S. diplomat, Steve Pfeiffer, who has called, extending New START a no-brainer. It's such an important thing. And also, Putin likes New START and has even already said he would easily accept an extension.
Can you remind me what New START is? Oh, okay. The treaty calls for having the number of strategic nuclear missile launchers. A new inspection and verification regime will be established. It does not limit the number of operationally inactive nuclear warheads, but it would be having the number of, like, I guess, new strategic nuclear missile launchers, the actual apparatus that launches the missile.
And that's the thing, is that I think something like that is easy, and it's clearly for a mutual benefit, right? So I just don't know, and I just don't know. But I'm just worried that if we start erasing everything that we've accomplished towards the end of the Cold War, it could only go down. I just don't know if it could go up.
Yeah, and again, that idea that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast of the unicorn, right? Again, Trump is a businessman, and he does view these treaties as business deals, and unfortunately, I don't think that's how global geopolitics works. It's not this, like, handshaking, we both win transaction. It is this, like, well, you gotta have to give some to get some. Things aren't going to be perfect. Of course, states are going to try to skirt rules. I mean, it's not like the U.S. has done that plenty of times. So it is this imperfect world we live in, and where we have to deal with imperfections. And so, this idea that, oh, this is a bad treaty, we're going to come back when we have a better one. Okay, I understand that logic, but what does a better one look like? What is that better one? That's another thing too that Pompeo and Trump have said is we'll come back in 6 months when it's better. If we have a better idea, what is defined as better? What does that look like to you guys? Like, I'd like to know what Pompeo thinks would be a better treaty, or how we are going to hold Russia accountable. It's just a lot's up in the air, and I think that Trump is anything but a constructivist. In fact, I think he's a deconstructivist on the global scale, right? This America first, quasi isolationism. He's deconstructing these things, and I just don't see a better replacement, even though they say one's coming.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And unfortunately, I think this coronavirus pandemic, in some ways is going to lead to more deconstruction of globalism as we know it. especially just in the fact that I think a lot of people have realized we can't rely on just one place, China, for everything when it comes to medicine and other supplies. But I think also it's gonna decline trust around the world, and the problem is that usually I'm a huge supporter of diplomacy, but the issues that I have with this are just that they've pretty much scrapped the State Department.
Yeah.
And there just hasn't really been a mantra. And, it's funny, when you look through political history, usually it's ambassadors and diplomats that are some of the most standout figures. Like during the Cold War, so many different, diplomats, ambassadors, everything were so crucial to the process. And I think that Trump has cut some of that out. And I think Pompeo is an interesting character because he's a yes man to Trump. So automatically everyone thinks that he only does what Trump has done. But he has had some quiet side successes. Obviously, he's always never been for Iran. But, he did help try to at least get peace talks and harbage a deal between the Taliban and the United States. Mm-hmm. And there have been other small style deals where I don't think he's quite as controversial as some people may think. I mean, he is a West Point man and pretty intelligent, but I think we just need someone to maybe take a step away from Trump on some of these and say, okay, cool, let's pull out. But what's the next step? What's the plan? And there's just none of that right now. And it's another reason I think this administration, if they had another term in office, would maybe need to look in the mirror and say, like, what are we doing here? But clearly they're not going to do that.
Or, if we do decide that, this deal is bad, Russia is a bad actor, we don't think that this is beneficial to stay in, let us talk to Poland, Britain, France, Germany, get their side of it and make sure that because I think it says a lot more if the entire, Western European side all says, hey, we're backing out of this deal because you're cheating. That would scare Russia a lot more if now they don't have any ability to survey any of Western Europe. They're like, whoa, okay, maybe we shouldn't start skirting these rules anymore. But if just the U.S. backs out and Russia still has the ability to keep doing what they're doing with even less accountability, I just don't see this as a win for the U.S. or Europe.
Me neither. No, I think we can both agree on that for sure.
Now, I hope to get proven wrong. So again, I hope that in 6 months, Pompeo and Trump come back. Again, in 6 months, we'll see if they're still in office. But I hope that in 6 months, there's come back on, hey, we've talked to our allies, we have this better agreement, we have more accountability, we're going to start pressuring China. I hope I'm proved wrong because I would love to see that. I want success. I don't want Pompeo to fail. I want us to succeed. But I don't really have much faith currently.
No, me neither. But hopefully you're right. And the problem is, if it's Biden, whoever else, or Trump, they're all going to have to do a lot of due diligence, a lot of research, and a lot of discussion because it's going to take some time and a lot of methodology to get back to having some of these deals sustained. So yeah. Even if the Trump administration has a plan at hand, it could be a lot to then ask, for example, I mean, I think Russia would be easier, but for example, in Iran, having them come back to the table with us, I think would be impossible.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. And that's always an issue with American politics around the world is that because we change presidents and administrations so often, it is tough for these less democratic states, like Putin's been in office for forever, or basically in office, even though someone else he was basically in charge for a little bit. And Iran with the Ayatollah, right? That's not a democracy at all. So you have these states that are solid structures for decades, whereas our administrations are changing every 4 to 8 years. It does make it, I think the nature of our democracy does make it difficult to have consistency with some of these treaties. But that's why it's so important that regardless of party, Democrat or Republican, that we try and have somewhat of a through line as far as our geopolitical stance. But it makes things difficult. It certainly makes things difficult.
Yeah, completely. And I'll wrap up at least all I have to say, which is that I think that's why Trump has been so unconventional, is that no matter what party has been in office, usually there's at least been some sort of standard line, right? Like obviously the George W. Bush's administration probably were more forceful in Iraq than, say, maybe Barack Obama's administration would have wanted to. But there was still kind of a general agreement on alliances, the go-to, the channels, the correct process. And I think Trump's kind of all thrown that to the bin. And as we've seen with some things, maybe that's for the better, but probably for most things, it causes chaos, and I think that's a good point you have, is that I think the United States foreign policy is very dependent on public opinion and democratic values. And there's definitely pros and cons to that. Obviously China, the positive they get out of this one state rule and having Xi Jinping for the very foreseeable future is that they can literally dictate an entire policy around what they want to do. And nothing probably is going to get in the way of that. Now, obviously there's cons to that because, there's nothing that gets in the way of it. So if it's an oppressive policy or something detrimental to the rest of the world, it's pretty hard to change that from the inside. But I think that's an interesting point you bring up. And it probably does make us not the most popular dinner guest at the table of foreign countries.
Well said, my friend. Well said.
Yeah, fun time like always. What do you guys think? Was this a good decision? Does the Trump administration maybe have something in mind that's not being discussed? Or are we just kind of going down a path that could be hard to fix? Let us know, please. And as always, you can find us on YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and those third-party sites. And thanks for listening. I know we're in some pretty crazy times right now, but keep your head up, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks.
Take care.